Hello and welcome back to some more Kerbal Space Program with me, the Green Dragon. In this episode, I suppose we can call it, we will be demonstrating how to build a vehicle of going to Duna, landing and coming back to Kerbin in a single launch with sufficient fuel reserves for, dealing with a few mistakes. Something that can get there in a nice, comfortable way without worrying too much about running out of fuel. So, well, here we are. Let's take a quick look. We have 3 sets of solid boosters and 4 main boosters here, as well as I don't know what to call it, but essentially there's fuel tanks for the nuclear engines, which systematically are detached as the lander uses up, as the capsule or the ship uses up fuel, which makes it very efficient because it quickly gets rid of any excess weight. So let me just take one more look at how it is set up, and we will try to build something like this. Now, Duna trip here is 136 parts. It is very stable, it is very efficient, and it gets there very nicely. So let us start constructing a new one. For a start, we will most definitely need a decoupler and a parachute. Then we will attach 2 hard points to this in order to set up our engine system. And on top of that we will add drogue chutes, which we'll also need, and we should add these as high as possible. That is kind of necessary. And then we add 2 more radial parachutes here, because we will be taking care of most of our Delta V requirements for landing on Duna safely with parachutes. Then, moving on, we take struts and we carefully strut the fuel tanks here, making sure not to clip these steps here or the actual capsule hatch. And we might want to add another set here, and that should make it more or less stable. Further on, then we add some nuclear engines for efficiency, and then we add this. And that will be our final stage. That's more or less what returns to Kerbin. More or less, it depends, but generally speaking. Then we add a decoupler, one of these, another decoupler, and drag another one out here. Add this, where's my decoupler? My decoupler is here, and add this. And that, well, actually, we're gonna do it like this. We're gonna save now, and we actually need to add landing legs to make sure that we can land. And the way this is constructed, this pod here stays on even as we land, but our stuff is, our landing legs are here. But before we do that, make sure that everything is strutted together. Although it does occur to me that, well, never mind. Just 4 struts with 4x as close to the outside of the tank, going as close to straight up as possible, should allow for this. Now we need, and here we are. Okay. This test is important because if you screw this up, you will have to redo the whole flight. And there we are. We can in fact do it like this. Alright. Okay. Then, further on, we want to add 2 struts here, because we might be landing with just this stage, depending on how much fuel you use. you shouldn't. You should still have this nearly full when you launch from Duna, but in case you don't, an extra strut will help. And 2 sets of struts here to tie the engine to strap it down. This is necessary in order for us to be able to move at 4x time warp safely. And since this is pretty simple design, well, yeah. Now this big tank, well, actually we could, for extra efficiency, split it into 2 and strap them together like that, but I don't think that is necessary in this case, because it is very stable as it is, and we won't have any problems with, I mean, it is very fuel efficient as is, and we won't have any trouble with that in any case. So what we do now is we turn it to 1 symmetry, and you can switch it while a part is in your hand without clicking this bit, that is, with your mouse, by pressing X. And here we have 2 fuel lines, obviously leading up to here. Okay, so here, utility, we move to the mobility enhancers, and we will need to, you will also need to turn off snap to angles. We will need to move these so that we have the ability to get down there. Although I believe that in this particular case this might be more efficient if we do it like this. And there we go. That should allow our astronauts to, damn it. Okay. But that should allow our astronauts to disembark safely. There wasn't too much space between this second detachable fuel tank and the ground, so yeah, that should be a long enough ladder. I will not test it, I'm sure it is good enough. We can use Kerbal Engineer to see just what kind of delta V we have here. And since the staging is screwed up, it thinks there is very little, but you can see that we have more than 9,000 meters per second here, which is more than enough to go to Duna, land, take off and get back to Kerbin. So, as you can see, all's well in Rocketland. Further, I suggest turning back on snap to angles and using these decouplers, because they will put more space between your ship and these parts, but these do tend to glitch out. You can try to attach it directly to another fuel tank and then attaching it to a decoupler, and that usually fixes the bug in my experience. Just make sure that they're properly aligned, like this. For cosmetics reasons, I add a protective rocket cone, and it does add a convenient place from which to attach things. Like this. Once again, you need to, I suggest doing the attachment from here to make sure that it does not clip the hatch, because that can cause some weird bugs. And furthermore, I suggest 2 more struts, like 2 more sets of struts, that is, like this, in order to further tie it down. We will have a double stack of those after we raise up the capsule a bit. And here is where we want quite a few struts, because the main cells and these orange tanks in such large amounts, come on, select strut, there we go, are pretty unstable, so strut them together here, do an X shape here, because it really, well, it really helps. Strut together these connection points and prevent wobble there. You want another one here and another one right below the engines, I find, and that should be more than stable enough. Up at the top we add a winglet for rotation killing, and further down we will have the actual mainsail. Now what we will do next is we will check Well, next we will actually add a fuel line, but then we will check with the Kerbal Engineer yet again. How much do we have? We have 4,000 meters per second. If you do the gravity turn right, you need about 4.5 to 5,000 to get safely into orbit. 5,000 will give you a neat little reserve. 4.5 is about what you actually need. So now, as for our final step, we will add these. Place it right next to it, and then turn it by 1 notch away from the central one. Make sure the central one is aligned properly, like this, same as the winglet. Okay, there you have your decouplers, and now all you have to do is add a set of boosters to those, and that should be fine, provided there are no bugs here. Again, make sure those are as properly aligned as possible. First placed on the fuel tank. If it bugs out, the decouplers in 18.4 are weird like that. If you're doing it in 18.2, it should still be fine. In any case, make sure you add all the boosters. These will give you an additional push to... They will give you the delta V you need to get into orbit safely. We are just over 4,500 meters per second. Alright, so far so good. So this is aligned. You may wish to add a set of struts here to prevent any flexing here. Sideways stuff should be pretty good, but if you're paranoid about that, you can add some struts here as well. It won't hurt. I do not think it's really necessary if you strap the main boosters together properly, but it's your ship, it's up to you. Next, identify which are the decouplers these are actually connected to on the staging side and drag all of them into the same stage. Next, make sure that all the engines are igniting at the same time. These 4 boosters are here, that is fine. And then make sure that these detach in the right sequence. Then create another stage and place all the parachutes. Actually, all the parachutes should be between this main tank detaching and this small tank detaching. So after this decouple, you add all the parachutes. Although, actually no, wait. You can add them all together, but I suggest to place the drogue chute separately to the couple first, and then you use the rest of the parachutes once those drogue chutes have actually fully deployed and your speed is low enough for you to be able to do that safely. And that is the ship more or less ready for flight. If you feel that you can fly to Duna on your own, you can stop here. But I will do another, well, not another video, actually I will continue this video. Stabilizers, and that might be a problem. Right, I believe we should be able to time warp safely. I will wait until we are in proper alignment with Duna, and then we will launch our mission. You will have to wait for a few seconds. Yes, I suggest adding launch stabilizers to... Well, actually, I will show you. It will probably be better that way, and I don't have to worry about it exploding once I exit time warp. Now, if you want this to be absolutely stable, add 1 launch stabilizer for each one of these, and add 1 more set going to the second fuel tank here. You might need to remove this strut or reposition it. I do not find it to be really necessary, so I don't have a problem with that, but it's something to take into account. Then next, make sure that all the launch clamps are on the same stage. In order to actually go to Duna, We will need to wait for the right moment, and then the way I do it is I'm gonna launch straight for Duna without accomplishing Kerbin orbit first, but you can orbit and start burning once you are... Whoa! Once you are above... Well, essentially you start burning for Duna just as you are passing onto the night side of Kerbin. Either whether you're in orbit or on the ground, it more or less works out alright. Set that as target, and we need to wait until we are some 30 degrees behind Duna, or less than that, when launching from Kerbin. Now that is less than 100% efficient, since theoretically you should launch at 45 degrees away, but measuring that is extremely difficult. And if you launch too soon, then you will have to do one full orbit around the Sun at least before you are able to actually, you know, get where you're going, if not more. If you launch too late, you just waste a tiny amount of fuel. And since this thing is built with a great deal of reserve fuel, we will be fine. Also, single launch, I think, lets you shoot for your target more efficiently. Now, this is more or less what you want to be looking at. I will wait a tiny bit more just to make sure, and that is more or less alright. So, we will make sure that we are not on the correct spot on Kerbin. We will wait until the planet rotates here, and this is more or less our launch window. Press F3 to bring up the mission log, make sure nothing has broken. Throttle up your engines. Press the SAS key, whatever that might be, T in my case. Throttle up to full at first for the initial acceleration, then we will start to throttle our engines down as the main cells start to overheat. So let's launch. It is a bit laggy from all of the solid boosters functioning, I think, or maybe I just need to restart my system. But in any case, watch those main cell overheats, they'll start to go up pretty fast. Once they're at about 2/3, throttle down 2 notches and leave it at that. You want to manage your speed to be moving below 150, 140 until you hit some 4,000-5,000 altitude. Then you want to keep below 200. By the time you hit 10,000, you can move at 300, and when you hit 13,000, you can just accelerate in whatever way you wish. That is to limit speed losses due to air resistance, and just nudge your throttle to keep yourself more or less at it. I mean, those numbers are to give you a general idea as to how fast you can allow yourself to be moving. Just keep yourself accelerating constantly, but don't accelerate too fast or you will waste the fuel. The main cells are very powerful, and as you can see, we've already used up half our fuel, so we need to be careful. At 10,000 degrees you can start by turning towards 60 degrees. That's the proper altitude for gravity turn. By the time the gravity turn is finished with vehicle this big, you'll need to start turning further. So at about 15, 16, 14,000, somewhere in that range, turn to 45. Try to keep it on the 90-degree mark, but that is not absolutely necessary. Then as you pass 25,000 or 22,000, turn a bit further towards 25 or 30 degrees, and that's more or less it. When you hit 32,000, you can turn almost completely horizontally. There at 30,000 we will keep it at 10-degree up angle. That should be perfectly viable. As you can see, our speed is picking up very nicely. We are making a pretty decent shot for our target. There we go. A bit down. And we could make this carries us into space. It definitely does. And as you can see from our speed, we would have enough fuel to make it into orbit. And this is the bit where we need to be really careful. This is where we can lose stuff. You might want to add some separatrons to that, or use RCS, tiny amounts of RCS, to stabilize your craft. You do not want a lot of extra weight. But we appear to have managed to stabilize ourselves more or less, and at this point we are running on our final set of engines. Since the craft is so very stable, we can enter, and I suggest you do so, 4x physical time warp. Press Alt, hold Alt, and then press the time warp keys to enter physical time warp even if you are outside the atmosphere. And right now we just do a shot towards Duna, and that's that. As you can see, that is going up nicely. We are accelerating, and this, launching from this point, will push us into a higher orbit around the Sun. And this just saves us a significant deal of energy by burning deeper in the gravity well. Whether you're in orbit or not, as long as you're burning horizontally and not straight up, will save you fuel, because you get free energy from the gravity well, essentially. The way this works is, say you're in orbit at 100,000 meters. Okay, so, well, burning at your lowest point helps, but the thing is, essentially, the gravity pulls at you and that gives you speed. But if you spend less time in the gravity well, on your way out of the gravity well, if you spend less time in the gravity well than you spend going in, that actually saves you energy, since the gravity takes away less speed than you gained from it. As you can see, we have, and you should watch the map here, we have managed to get an escape from Kerbin, so now we will, okay, at this point, once you start getting within 2000 kilometers of the planet, a close pass within that kind of, range, you should exit the time warp. Well, whenever things get close, exit the time warp and proceed more slowly. Keep burning at slower and slower speeds while your periapsis is going up. The moment it starts going down, stop burning and head for the planet. Now, this stage should have more than enough fuel to drop into orbit if you should so choose. Well, it has enough fuel to drop into orbit. We will make sure to come in on the sunny side of the planet, but other than that, we will go for a straight landing, because we're only interested in visiting. And we will try to go horizontally, I believe, to come in more or less horizontally, but other than that, we will leave it at that. Right. Okay. For the return trip, we will have to wait for a while until Kerbin is in a good position for a, intersect, or maybe, essentially, you want the planets to be in the same position relative to each other when you launch. So, if we wanted Duna to be 30 degrees ahead of Kerbin, we will want much the same for when we return. Now, very shortly, we will get an encounter with Duna, and we will have to set up our approach. It looks like we'll be coming in relatively good, but we will shortly see that. Now, you could fix the maneuver nodes. Well, that is not a good approach at all. However, we can fix that relatively easily. Since it has a 3-man command capsule, it works out fine. Anyway, you could have adjusted the inclination. You could enter a stable orbit and screw around with it some to really, you know, set things up properly. But that is not what we're interested in. We just want a halfway decent landing. More than that we don't really need. So I will kill my northwards, well, southwards heading somewhat in order to, although, well, no. If we wanted to drop in, we could use an aero brake. We could then repack the drogue chutes if we use those in orbit. And that's another thing which we'll have to do. We'll have to do an EVA in order to repack our chute for the command capsule, because we will use that in our, you know, approach. I will change the direction of my orbit here though to come in on the other side of the planet, because I do want to land on the sunny side, and that would make things a lot easier. Now we exit the time warp, and we have an unfortunate Ike encounter there. However, I believe that... okay, that's fixed it. Alright, you can screw around with things some if you wish. We are not landing near our base. I can tell you that right now. Come on, turn that away. We are definitely not landing near our base. You want a relatively low perhaps, since Duna's atmosphere is so weak. If you dip below 10,000, you should probably reach an altitude where you can deploy your drogue chutes. So we're gonna set it at 10,000. We're gonna come in pretty hot, but that shouldn't bother us. Now, at this point, I suggest, once you have set up a decent approach, I suggest decoupling this. You can keep it if you're worried about it, but moving a bit away from that might not be the worst thing to do. So let's just say goodbye to that and head in. Now you have to be really careful with time warp, because if you warp too fast, you will just swing through the atmosphere without the game's function of limiting the speed at which you can time warp ever kicking in, and you will swing back out into space. So be careful with that. Our staging appears to be... we did not use the stage function for that, so let's do that now. Make sure that our parachute is deployed next. And oh yeah, but we should land somewhere on the equator, so if we do a 90-degree launch, we should be pretty good. We might want to sync our orbits with one of these with one of these equatorial orbit targets in order to land, be able to launch into interplanetary space without creating a huge node with Kerbin. As you can see, at 40,000 we have entered the upper reaches of the atmosphere. Now, I suggest using the physical time warp until you're lowered down, because nothing cool will happen until you're lowered down. You do want to be pointed retrograde at all times. Make sure before you enter the atmosphere that your ship is pointed retrograde, or at the very least, once you enter the upper reaches of the atmosphere, point retrograde. Now we're pretty low down, and at this altitude we can deploy our drogue chutes, so I suggest you do that. Your ship should be able to handle the stress, if everything is strung together properly anyway. Do not deploy the rest of the chutes. We're going on drogue chutes alone, and you want a nice shallow approach, so don't bring your periapsis below, say, 8,000. 8 to 12,000 range should be about right. Now once you're about 2,500–3,000 meters up from surface, these will deploy fully. At that point, after giving it a few seconds to calm down, it should be safe to deploy the rest of the chutes. And now we are just waiting for that to happen. I suggest not using the physical time warp at this point, because if you use physical time warp at the time when parachutes deploy fully, it can rip your ship apart. It is not very friendly with that. Now, I suggest picking a guy. Bob will do. Look at the vertical speed and radar altitude. We are at about 2000 meters up. Press C to exit, and then you can press C to go right back to your guy. That's the C key. We will toggle this a lot on our landing because it will help get the numbers we need. We need to avoid any serious bouncing or flexing on our landing so as to protect this fuel tank though. In any case, we deploy the rest of our chutes. We toggle the SAS to allow our ship to reorient itself to the vertical. At this point we are pretty low down and we need to ignite our engines. Once you're below 300, I suggest keeping the speed low at about 15 meters per second. 5 meters per second for every 100 meters of altitude you have left. That should be about right. The parachutes will fight you, don't worry about it, that's alright. Make your adjustments and gently set yourself down. Don't worry about fuel. In Duna's thin atmosphere, the nuclear rocket motors are still some of the most efficient things out there. Nudge the throttle up slightly at the final moment and we are down. Cut the engines. We have landed on Duna's surface. Now if we have managed to place those landing ladders right, Jebediah is ready as the captain to take his first steps on the surface of Duna. And as it appears we have done everything alright, we get to say our first words on this red planet. My, that looks really sandy and red, doesn't it? There's nothing here, let's head back. Whoa! I pressed the wrong key, told him to jump, he smacked his head. Don't worry, he was dropped many times on his head when he was a baby, which gives him his wonderful attitude, so it won't really hurt him. What's one more time? Now, we can actually repack the chutes. Now, we will have to right-click on them when we want to deploy them though, because this will glitch out that chute, but other than that we should be fine. Now, we throttle up. Check our position on the map. We are more or less at the equator, so actually we might have wanted to wait for the correct launch window on the ground, but it doesn't matter, you can do that in a high Duna orbit as well. Although it has to be high, like 600 by 600 kilometers. Don't worry about slipping sideways, just keep it at 45-50 degrees. You can launch at 60 if you want to gain a bit of altitude, but the atmosphere is so thin that it won't matter. And this tank should carry us almost all the way into orbit. Well, it should allow us to orbit if we don't botch it. So that should leave the rest of these tanks for the return trip, which is more than enough, I assure you. Now we will want a nice high orbit here, so as to be able to use proper levels of time warp. Although, actually, screw it, we can just burn for interplanetary space. And as this is spent, we detach it. Goodbye, there it goes. Now this should ideally put us into a lower. It will put us into a lower. But since we are behind Kerbin, we will have to wait in interplanetary space but either way you will have to time warp in order to do this. Waiting until Kerbin is 30 degrees behind you will work, as will just orbiting several times as you catch up to it. Now, yeah, you want Kerbin to be behind you, but not by too much. So, I believe we will. We can play with the maneuver nodes to get some idea as to where it will be useful to burn. There we go. That will not be useful. And we can do this, in fact, to determine the right spot for a burn. Just drag it around your orbit. Okay, so somewhere here will be about right for... And with all that fuel left, we only need 356 meters per second to set up an encounter. And we won't try to get into a stable orbit around Kerbin either. We will quite simply drop ourselves into something with a decently low perhaps, say 25-30,000. If we re-enter with just a capsule attached, that's some 35,000. You know? Sorry, with just a capsule it's 25, with the lander still attached. If we want to detach it in the atmosphere, that is something in the realm of 32-35 over the spot where we want to land. And yeah, that should allow us to do a pretty decent re-entry, have some general control over where we land. We will have to wait for another month or so before we get our maneuver point. But once we're there, we will try to bring our perhaps in as low as possible. We will have to do final adjustments once we're actually in Kerbin's sphere of influence. We won't be able to avoid that. Your predicted path tends to change once you move between spheres of influence. I have heard, although I can't 100% confirm, that if you do those sphere of influence changes at lower time warps, it helps. So you might wish to try that if you're having problems with it. In any case, we have reached our maneuver node more or less, so let us carry out our burn. And the advantage of this design is, of course, as we noticed previously, that it is extremely efficient while at the same time being very stable, which allows us to use the 4x time warp. I believe this ship is powerful enough to go to some of Joule's less, shall we say, gravity heavy moons. Now, we have more or less completed our maneuver, and we now kill our node in order to... Okay, that is going up. We will fiddle with it somewhat here. That is going down. That is going way down. That is going up again. And we will try to bring it in pretty low, which means make for less fuel later on our approach. We also don't want to be too low. I mean, we don't want to approach from a polar angle, we want to land somewhere on the equator. But that appears to be the best we will manage to do, and that's not too bad. Anything within 7.5 or 8,000 here will do fine. So, yeah. And what you do is, when you come in, when you want to adjust your periapsis down, don't burn straight up or down. Okay? Think of your speed as a sum of two speeds. One of those speeds is going up and down. We don't want to catch. We just want to slightly nudge our trajectory to come more or less straight at the planet, almost straight at the planet. That's what we want to do. We don't want to kill our speed. We just want to alter the direction we're moving slightly. Okay, in a second I will demonstrate. Once we're coming in at carbon, we'll come in pretty straight up. Straight down, that is. But, alright, as you can see, this is our retrograde marker. Mostly it's pointed towards, well, up. But some of it is pointed towards north. So what we will do is we will ignore the up part of our trajectory and we'll burn straight north in order to just adjust our angle slightly. And as you can see, our periapsis is going down very quickly as a result. Okay, now we do not want to come in straight down. That is suicidally stupid. So we will adjust ourselves towards the 270 in this case, so as to come in more on the daylight side, like this. Now a short burn later, we are... Come on, give me a perigee. Periapsis, whatever. There we go, we have a periapsis, but we waited slightly too long. So we have to turn in order to bring it down, because if we graze the atmosphere at that altitude, it will be too little. We'll put it at 23,000, which will give us a nice shallow approach without screwing things up too badly in any way. Now we will be picking up speed, but that is not a problem, and we are coming in more or less on the equator, which will make our ship easy to recover. Not that we will recover it, we will not, but it does provide some possibilities. Well, it's mostly for role-playing reasons, really. Again, be careful with time warp. If you do want to time warp, watch this time to periapsis marker, not how far away from it you are, because that is deceptive. As you get deeper and deeper into gravity well, you start really accelerating. As you can see here, we're really picking up speed now. And we're still ways off, but we only have 20 minutes until we hit that. So right now, what I will do is turn my ship retrograde, so that this thing is behind us. Well, actually we can turn straight up so that it isn't moving along our direct path, and we will decouple here. And that is weird, but even so, it should move far enough away from us, even if it moves weirdly, to allow us to safely deploy. And since we ditched it mostly retrograde, once we deploy our parachute, we will slow down, whereas that thing will just keep going. Ah, and we are in the atmosphere. Whoa! Anyway, try to point retrograde. It's starting to... Oh, our capsule has less drag than that, but even so, we managed to bypass it safely. Right. I suggest bleeding off some of your speed as you come in before deploying your parachute, because there is a good chance that you will have plenty of speed left over even at when you reach an altitude low enough to deploy a parachute. Wait until you're down to some 250–300 meters per second. As you can see, our approach is very good. We are only pulling something like 3 Gs, which is perfectly survivable, and our guys are nice and safe because of that. Now we are going in, we have slowed ourselves down sufficiently, so let's turn our capsule around and deploy the chute. Unfortunately, that was a bug, and our guys are now dead. If that is the case, I suggest an alteration to our design. Structural failure. How? I do not know. Maybe we should have waited longer. Maybe. But I suggest an alteration to save the lives of crew members in case the primary parachute fails. And we will deploy 2 radial parachutes on the capsule here. Now where did those go? Those went there after the final detach, which is all exactly as it should be. we do a final save, and there it is. That's how you get to Duna. Now that final accident is weird. That's the first time that happened to me. But in any case, having reserve parachutes just in case is a good idea anyway. And of course, feel free to make any modifications to this design you feel like you might have to do. In my opinion, it does a good job of getting to Duna and getting back, barring any parachute failures. And that might have resulted from using the same parachute 2 times. But in any case, that is easily fixable. That's how you get to Duna and back safely. Hope you enjoyed this. Leave your comments, leave your likes, give this a share. And I'll see you guys next time.